All right, ready to step into the ring?
Always up for a good fight.
Today, we're diving deep into the life of Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion. You want to go beyond just the boxing, though, right?
Absolutely. His story is so much bigger than just what happened in the ring.
And that's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive, gritting into the nitty-gritty. So, Jack Johnson, born 1878, former slaves, right in the heart of the Jim Crow South. You'd think his childhood would be all about segregation and hardship.
It's fascinating, right? Because while Johnson's upbringing was definitely marked by poverty, his descriptions of Galveston, Texas paint a slightly more complex picture.
Okay, paint that picture for me.
He talks about black and white children playing together, sharing meals, almost a sense of integration that seems at odds with the Jim Crow era.
That's wild, considering those laws were all about keeping the races separate.
Exactly. And that's what makes Johnson's later defiance, his refusal to bow to those segregational pressures, all the more extraordinary. It's like those early experiences, that glimpse of a more integrated world, maybe it fueled his fight against injustice.
Almost like he knew what was possible, so he refused to accept anything less.
Right, exactly. And that defiance, that unwavering spirit, it's evident in every aspect of his life, but especially in his journey to becoming a boxing legend.
Because let's be real, this wasn't some kid with a silver spoon groomed for greatness. His path to the top was anything but straightforward.
You could say that again.
Yeah.
We're talking odd jobs, working on the docks, exercising horses. He even did some time in jail.
Hold on, this is where the story gets good, right? The whole jailhouse boxing match thing.
Yeah, this is where things take a turn you wouldn't believe.
So set the scene for me. Who's this Joe Trinsky character he meets behind bars?
Picture this. Johnson ends up in jail, minor infraction. And he meets Joe Chiensky, a seasoned pro boxer who just happens to be serving time as well.
What are the odds?
Right. And maybe the sheriff was feeling generous, or maybe he saw a good fight brewing, but he actually allowed them to spar in the cell.
Talk about a captive audience. No ring, no referee, just two guys, raw talent on display.
Exactly. And Chiensky, he sees something special in Johnson, this raw, untrained power. He decides to take him under his wing, teach him proper technique, strategy.
Essentially becomes his boxing mentor, all because of a chance encounter in jail.
It's crazy, right? The guy learns to box in a jail cell, and look what he goes on to achieve.
It just shows you never know where life's going to take you. But it also speaks to Johnson's character, his drive. He could have just served his time, but no, he uses it as an opportunity to hone his skills, learn from the best.
And remember, this is all happening against the backdrop of intense segregation in the boxing world. There was a separate colored heavyweight champion title, basically a way to keep black fighters from competing for your real deal.
But Johnson, he wasn't going to stand for that, was he? He knew he was destined for greatness, and he wasn't going to let anyone tell him otherwise.
And he wasn't afraid to prove it either. Before he even set his sights on the world championship, he takes on the reigning black heavyweight champ at the time, a guy named Klondike Haynes.
He defeats Klondike Haynes, establishes himself as the best black fighter, and then it's like he sets his sights even higher. He's coming for the world championship title. It's not just about boxing anymore. It's about breaking barriers, about demanding recognition in a world dead set on keeping him down.
And that's what makes his story so captivating, so powerful. He wasn't just fighting opponents. He was fighting for a place at the table, for an entire race that had been denied their rightful place.
So we've got this incredibly talented, ambitious, and let's face it, defiant black boxer on the rise, and it all leads up to this moment. 1908, Johnson finally gets his shot at the heavyweight championship.
And it's not just any title fight, right? It's in Sydney, Australia, of all places. Tommy Burns, the reigning champ. But here's the thing. Burns has been dodging Johnson for years, refusing to fight a black man for the title.
Talk about adding fuel to the fire. So it's more than just a boxing match at this point. It's symbolic, like the whole world's watching to see what happens.
Absolutely. The sources really highlight the racial tension surrounding this fight. You've got the widely held belief at the time, at least among white America, that a black man just wasn't capable of holding the heavyweight championship. It took a hefty payday to get Burns in the ring, something like $30,000, an incredible amount for the time.
Wow, yeah, that's saying something. So Johnson's fighting against these deeply ingrained prejudices before he even steps into the ring. Can you imagine that pressure?
It's hard to even fathom. Carrying the weight of an entire race's hopes and frustrations. But what does Johnson do? He wins. And he doesn't just squeak out a victory. He dominates Burns, knocks him out, claims the title that should have been his all along.
Okay, so I know what happens next. But first, tell me about the reaction to this victory. Because I'm guessing it wasn't all sunshine and roses.
Oh, it was definitely a mixed bag. You had black communities across America erupting in celebration, rightfully so. Here was this symbol of black excellence, a man who had defied the odds and proven what they always knew. They were just as capable, just as deserving. But of course, for many in white America, there was this sense of outrage, this desperate need to find someone, anyone, to take that title back.
And that someone, that great white hope they pinned their hopes on, was James J. Jeffries.
The former champ, undefeated in his prime. But here's the thing, he was been retired for years. We're talking about a guy who had to come out of retirement, lose a ton of weight, just to even step into the ring with Johnson.
This is July 4th, 1910. Talk about a fight for the ages. They even built a special arena in Reno, Nevada, just for this. 20,000 people. Imagine the energy.
It wasn't just a boxing match. It was a cultural phenomenon. The media hyped it up as this battle of the races. Jeffries, the great white hope. Johnson, the embodiment of everything white America feared.
And Johnson, in the face of all that pressure, all that hatred, he still prevailed.
And in such a decisive way, He knocks Jeffries down for the first time in Jeffries' career. By round 15, it's over. Jeffries' corner throws in the towel. Johnson proves definitively that he's the best, regardless of race.
And the reaction.
As you can imagine, it was explosive. Race riots erupt across the country, white mobs fueled by anger and resentment, lashing out.
It's a dark side to this story, a stark reminder of the racial tensions of the time, how a black man's victory was seen as a threat.
A threat to the established order, to white supremacy.
It's tragic because what Johnson achieved transcended sport. It challenged the very fabric of society. And that brings us to the next chapter, the aftermath of the Jeffries fight, and the ways in which Johnson continued to challenge expectations both inside and outside the ring. We're back. And you know what gets me about Jack Johnson's story? It's like the ring was just the beginning for him.
It's true. The guy was larger than life, even back then.
He wins the heavyweight championship, sparks a national conversation about race and equality, but he doesn't stop there. It's like he takes that victory and uses it as a platform to challenge every convention, every expectation placed upon a black man in the early 1900s.
And this is where things get really interesting, because it's not just about the boxing anymore. It's about his lifestyle, his choices, his refusal to conform.
So spill the tea. What kind of things are we talking about? We've already covered jailhouse boxing matches and taking on the whole world. What could top that?
Oh, Johnson finds ways. How about this?
Yeah.
He lives lavishly. We're talking fast cars, fancy clothes, the whole 9 yards. He's not afraid to enjoy the fruits of his labor, which, in and of itself, was pretty audacious for a black man at the time. But there's more.
I'm on the edge of my seat. Hit me with it.
He openly dates and marries white women. This is during a time when interracial relationships were taboo, even illegal in many parts of the country.
Talk about breaking barriers. He really wasn't afraid to make a statement, to live life on his own terms, consequences be damned. And how did people react to this? It must have been a whirlwind.
Absolutely. It was incredibly polarizing. On one hand, you had, particularly within the black community, this incredible sense of pride. Johnson became a symbol of black masculinity, a beacon of achievement. He was proof that they could rise above, live a good life, despite the limitations imposed by society. But of course, among many in white America, there was fear, anger. He represented everything they wanted to keep down.
And one of the ways they tried to control him, to punish him for his defiance, was through the Mann Act. This was a law passed in 1910, if I'm remembering correctly. What was it all about?
On paper, the Mann Act was meant to prevent the transportation of women across state lines for immoral purposes. Now, that might sound well-intentioned on the surface, but it was often used to target and punish interracial relationships.
So they basically twisted the law to fit their agenda. What happened with Johnson? How did they use this against him?
In 1912, he was arrested, charged with transporting his girlfriend, Lucille Cameron, across state lines for, you guessed it, immoral purposes.
And Lucille Cameron, just for context, she's white, right? And she later becomes his wife.
That's right. Now, to this day, there's debate about whether there was any actual wrongdoing on Johnson's part, or if this was purely a case of racial persecution.
Sounds like a blatant attempt to take him down for stepping out of line. So what happened? Was he found guilty?
He was. In 1913, an all-white jury found him guilty. But here's where things take another interesting turn. Instead of sticking around to serve his sentence, Johnson flees the country. He spends 7 years in exile, living abroad, continuing to box, before finally returning to the U.S. in 1920 to serve his time.
7 years in exile. It just goes to show, the man was never one to back down. even when facing a system designed to break him. And it makes you wonder, after all that, after the exile, after the prison sentence, did he ever express any regret, any sense of, man, I should have just played it safe?
From what I read, not really. He continued to live life on his own terms, defiant till the end.
That's incredible. And it speaks to his character, you know. He knew his worth and he refused to let anyone, not the media, not the legal system, not even society's expectations, dim his light. He lived his truth even when it was difficult, even when it was dangerous.
And that's why his story still resonates today. He was flawed, no doubt, but he's a symbol of resilience, of Black excellence, of a time when those things were actively suppressed. And it's why, over 100 years later, his legacy is still being re-examined, re-evaluated. In 2018, President Donald Trump granted him a posthumous pardon.
It's a reminder that justice, true justice, sometimes takes time, and that the fight for equality, for recognition, is an ongoing process. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from those early days in Galveston to the bright lights of the boxing ring, to the complexities of his personal life and the injustices he faced. Jack Johnson was more than just an athlete. He was a cultural icon who challenged the very fabric of America in the early 20th century. And his story continues to challenge us today, prompting us to confront the uncomfortable realities of our past and to strive for a more just and equitable future. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring those untold stories, and keep diving deep.